Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Made McGee. I am the Executive Director of the Leadership Alliance, and I'm an Associate Professor of the practice of Behavioral and Social Sciences at Brown University. And it is my privilege to welcome you to our fourth installment in a conversation with a doctoral scholar. So in these conversations, we feature alumni who've completed their doctoral degree and are fulfilling the mission of the Leadership Alliance as leaders and role models, diversifying the research workforce. So this event is a component of the professional development series of the Leadership Alliance. This is a new initiative that Leadership Alliance partners from across the country created to ensure continuity of skill building, networking, and exposure to graduate programs for students from across the country. And so I'd like to acknowledge and thank my team at the Executive Office and my colleagues at Brown University, at Chaminade University in Honolulu, at Weill Cornell Medical College, and Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine for their efforts in creating and implementing this program. So last week, we had an engaging conversation with Dr. Evelyn Simeon, who is Professor of Political Science from the University of Connecticut. And for those of you who were not able to join us, I invite you to check out the videos of past conversations with doctoral scholars on our Leadership Alliance YouTube channel. And you can also find videos that will be posted on our website at theleadershipalliance.org. So tonight we're in for a treat, because we have a doctoral scholar with whom we are going to have a wonderful conversation, and it's Dr. Angel Byrd. And so first I'd like to introduce Dr. Byrd. So Dr. Angel Byrd was born and raised in Edwards and Jackson, Mississippi. She obtained her Bachelor's of Science from Tougaloo College in Tougaloo, Mississippi, and her MD and PhD from Warren Alpert Medical School of Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. She completed an ethnic skin postdoctoral fellowship at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine under the direction of Dr. Jeanette Okoye. Currently, Dr. Byrd is an assistant professor at Howard University College of Medicine and adjunct assistant professor at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine in the Department of Dermatology, where her work centers on the establishment of tissue biobanks to understand the immunopathologic mechanisms contributing to ethnic skin diseases, particularly among African American patients with hidradenitis suppurativa. Her main research focus is elucidating the unreported roles of neutrophils and the innate immunity in the induction of local and systemic immune dysregulation. Dr. Byrd leads multidisciplinary collaborative projects with the overarching goal of establishing a scientifically driven approach to treatment options for patients suffering from these debilitating diseases. And she's contributed to the scientific literature, giving numerous lectures, national and international talks, and has been featured on the BET 33rd Annual UNCF and Evening of Stars. She's also been recognized her as one who was changing the face of science one mind at a time. We're so proud to have contributed to Dr. Byrd's academic and professional development. She participated in the Leadership Alliance Summer Research Early Identification Program at Brown University in 2003. So we're so delighted to have Dr. Byrd with us for this evening and for this conversation. Our conversation will evoke personal reflections centered around the theme, Succeeding in the Midst of It All, My Leadership Alliance Journey. And to start the conversation, we're going to ask Dr. Byrd to first talk about the impact of the Leadership Alliance on her journey and how she has been succeeding in the midst of it all. And then we're going to take your questions. We know that many of you have submitted questions in advance of the webinar, and we know that many of you are going to have plenty of questions for Dr. Byrd during her presentation. So please feel free to include your questions in the Q&A. So let's get started. Dr. Byrd.
Hello, how are you? I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for the opportunity just to share my story. My story would not be complete without the Leadership Alliance. So I'm happy to first just take the moment to just center it around just saying thank you for all that the Leadership Alliance has done and continues to do. And for the students, I thought it would be a good opportunity because I can talk about the mentorship, I can talk about the opportunities, I can talk about the experiences, but I wanted to give you some really hands-on like examples of how the Leadership Alliance has impacted my career and how it continues to do so. So a lot like you, the way that I got introduced to the Leadership Alliance was because I was not able to go back to China to do a research opportunity because of the SARS outbreak. And so, of course, I couldn't travel. And so my mentor said, well, you should try the Leadership Alliance. I was devastated. I was like, well, I wanted to go back to China. But then, honestly, it was the best thing that could have ever happened. So in applying for the Leadership Alliance, I had some opportunities with basic science research and with epidemiology with the Jackson Heart study. I really wanted to learn more about clinical research. So when I applied for that, I basically told them this is really what I'm interested in. And perfectly, they matched me with Dr. Rena Wing at the Weight Control and Diabetes Research Center at Brown. And from there, the rest is history. So that was my opportunity to learn more about clinical research. So I was really loving the basic science, the clinical research, epidemiology, and just learning how I can encompass all of that. And then, so if you fast forward, I go to Brown and then I wanted to finish that med school degree. And of course, there were struggles. And Leadership Alliance, again, was right there helping me through my board exams and just encouraging me. I remember right before I took step one, I went to the Leadership Alliance National Symposium where we all kind of gather and it's like our family reunion, so to speak. And it encouraged me in a way to know that I got this and I can do it. And so I will be forever grateful for just that opportunity that the Leadership Alliance always provides. In addition to that, I finished med school, that part of med school, went to grad school, and I was yearning for the opportunity to mentor and I wanted to give back, but it's only so much you can do when you're still on the grind trying to get your degrees. So there was opportunity, I could be a Leadership Alliance summer coordinator. And again, that was a great opportunity for me in the midst of graduate school to actually be able to mentor the next generation, which was awesome. Then fast forward even more, my dissertation, which was very challenging. There were people from the Leadership Alliance who I was able to call on. Dr. Gee has been through it, so she provided insight during that time. One of my mentors that I actually met at the Leadership Alliance National Symposium guided me through it, so just having that support. And then, so it just keeps going. It's like this gift that keeps giving. And then when I got ready to apply for my ethnic skin fellowship, which was basically like a postdoc, I had letters of recommendations from the Leadership Alliance. And then when I applied for my faculty role at Howard, Dr. Gee also wrote a letter of recommendation as well. So as you can see, like the Leadership Alliance has been an integral part of my life and my career trajectory. And so I will be forever grateful for that. And I can answer any specific questions about any of those different milestones.
Thank you so much, Angel. So I think the take-home message is, as you're establishing this network with colleagues and mentors that you've stayed in touch with them throughout your academic and professional trajectory, that has helped you to sustain in the midst of it all. So, you know, you're just doing wonderful things, and we're so proud of all that you have accomplished and all that you will accomplish. So let's get started with the questions. And so I want to start with a question from a student who asked more about your research and how it pertains to COVID-19. And so she says, my question is, what are the therapeutic approaches being used for hidradenitis suppurativa, HS? From here on, I'm going to call that HS.
Feel free.
So what are the therapeutic approaches being used for HS patients currently? And how could they be modified for HS patients with COVID-19?
Right. It's such a great question. And I think we have to think about HS pre-COVID first, right? So a lot of my day-to-day is trying to figure out the mechanism behind why the disease happens. We haven't even nailed that. So even before COVID was even here, impacting the community, we really don't understand the mechanism behind HS. So that's my day-to-day job, is to figure out the why, so then we can then influence the pharma companies and the drugs and the therapies that they are developing. One thing that I think is important to mention, and we actually just did a small paper about this, is that immunosuppressants are big in this particular disease, like your biologics, where we pretty much suppress the immune system to try to stop all of the chronic inflammation that's going on. That's one thing that we do know. We know that there's a lot of inflammatory responses that are going on. Well, if you think about, if you tamper an immune response, then you're then setting up that patient for diseases such as COVID-19, right? So we did a small paper where we were saying, hey, listen, this particular population, they are obese, a lot of them, they are African American, they do have comorbidities, and I'm sure you're thinking, like, these are the same things we've been hearing about COVID. So it was basically an opportunity for us to say, hey, we still haven't figured out this disease even pre-COVID, but during COVID, we definitely need to monitor them more closely, so that if we need to increase, decrease, monitor, or regulate their biologic doses, then it's important, especially during this time. So I think that's something that has been very important during this era, or this pandemic of COVID-19. Just being able to monitor them very, very closely. But we're still trying to figure out the why, honestly, to get those therapeutics developed.
Yeah, let's take the thread of COVID-19 and move into an aspect of that question.
Mm-hmm.
And the question's from a student who asked, what racial and ethnic disparities have you encountered in the COVID-19 pandemic, and what are their causes and effects?
Very good question. So I think when I hear that question, it can come from a lot of different angles, right? And I think the one that comes in mind very quickly when I hear this question is in a situation where, when you have opportunities to do more, given the situation, you do it, right? So I think all of us have had to really adjust to this thing called COVID, right? And really try to be productive in the midst of it. And so one of the things that our group has been able to do is do these like virtual meetings. We were able to write smaller papers that you don't necessarily have to be in the lab, but we're able to like write smaller papers, collaborate with our colleagues. So I have one colleague in particular who we collaborate, we work together all the time. And it was a situation, and we're working through this, and I'm sure she probably may see this, but it's okay, we will get through it. I think it was a good time for me to educate her on this, where one of the prestigious institutions was mentioned in the paper, but no matter how often or how many times I put Howard in the paper, less prestigious, but still very prestigious institution for a number of reasons, she couldn't understand why that was very offensive to continue to take it out, and why it could not be in the paper alongside of the other prestigious institution. So it was just an opportunity for us to educate and to like say how these implicit biases are there, and we have to stop it. And so you have to be vocal about it in a mature way. You don't have to be angry. You just try to take the opportunity to actually educate. And so that was something that I've been working through. And she and I are very close. So I just think it's just a matter of educating the ones that you work with closely.
That's great advice. Thanks for sharing that story, Angel. So now, because we're starting to see questions about the MD PhD program. And so there's students whose goal is to get an MD PhD. One student in particular is interested in focusing on dermatology research. So the student would like to know, what is it like working as an MD PhD? Do you focus more on research and then you see patients? Describe a day-to-day in perhaps a pre-COVID-19 life, as opposed to being in Zoom meetings all day.
Exactly. So that's a great question. And I think one of the things that I've always been very interested in is I respect and appreciate both degrees. I feel like there were things that I learned in medical school that, I will always, apply to whatever I'm studying or trying to advance a field in some manner or shape or form. And there are things that I learned from grad school that I apply as well. And you're taught to think very differently in those two trainings. So to give you an example of how I'm able to join the two, I learned about, of course, in med school, you learn about the human body, you learn about diseases and, what goes wrong, etc. And then in graduate school, I learned a lot about the normal host response. So I learned about the neutrophil, that cell, and how it responds in the normal sense. And I felt that when I was graduating and trying to figure out the next steps, I was yearning to figure out then, well, how is it that this normal response is abnormal in a human disease? And how can I use what I know about what should be going on that's not going on, that's leading to a disease that we're seeing clinically? And so that's exactly what I am able to do day to day. The good thing is that dermatology is so visual. Literally, the disease is right before your eyes. And it depends on when I see the patient, how I'm approaching the patient. When I look at an actual lesion, there are certain things from a medical standpoint that I'm thinking about, but mostly the clinical, the biologics, the therapy, the treatments. So my boss does all of that. I come in with more of the PhD hat, and I'm trying to think about what cells are there. How are these cells over responding or under responding? How is it that these patients are getting what we're seeing on their skin, so to speak? So because I do have both of the backgrounds, I'm able to put on the different hats and think about it in different ways and try to, move the field forward.
That's great. Yeah, that's a great response. Thanks for sharing that. So now let's stay in sort of your experience in an as an MD PhD, and let's move into some more real talk.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear your thoughts on a really great question of how has being a Black woman impacted or motivated your research and medical career?
Right, that's a really good question. And then I think when I think about that question, I think about when I'm thinking about my career, how do I want to impact, this field? And just so happened when I was trying to figure out the next steps, I saw this disease called hidradenitis suppurativa. I saw that it was studied by a Black woman who was very passionate about it, and she did a lot of work from the clinical standpoint. Then when I kept reading about it, just intrigued about the disease, I saw that this disease happens more often in African American females. But yet we don't understand the why behind it. And so, of course, being an African American female myself, I was intrigued by trying to see how can I be an advocate for those patients in this in the field of dermatology. And when you look at the papers, every time I would read the literature and look at the demographics, I would never see that the African Americans were represented. And so I kept asking myself, how can you have a disease that's more prevalent in the African American population, but yet they're not the ones that you're actually studying? And so in my day-to-day, I like really finding those unmet needs and figuring out how can I then meet those needs and move the field forward. So that's an example of how I was able to see this disease and what was needed in the field.
Yeah, so it's a great thing that you're studying that because you have a very unique perspective that you're bringing to this research. So I think we know that the MD PhD program is not very diverse, which is why it's so important for students who are really interested and understand, what it's like to move into that program. It's very important for them to do that. Talk about the diversity of the program when you were going through the MD PhD, and what were some of the challenges that you faced?
Mm-hmm. Right. So there's not too many of us, in terms of females, for one. And then, of course, if you layer on that an African American female, it's just not that many of us. So I think sometimes, you would get discouraged in a sense because you're like, well, can I do this? I don't see anybody here who looks like me who has done it. And that's why programs such as the Leadership Alliance is so important, because like when we go to LANS, when we go to that symposium, you're able to see in one room all these people who have done it. It really does something for your morale and just inspiring, who you are and knowing what you can be. I also think that being at an institution like Brown, although there wasn't too many of us, there was some. Like Dr. Vanessa Tony or Vanessa Bob. She was there when I was there, and there was others that were there that were ahead of me, and then I saw them. It was like, okay, I really can do this. And then being from Tougaloo, and because of the partnership that Tougaloo and Brown have, I think it was just that extra effort to make sure that you came here to get this MD, PhD. We're going to support you until you get there. And I feel like it's so important for when students are choosing their institution, you have to find that institution that works for you, appreciates you for who you are, and are going to support you through this tedious journey, because it is a very tedious journey. But as long as you have the support, as long as you have someone who, you know, and maybe they don't know about all the nuances that come along with being an African-American woman, but they're willing to listen, they're willing to learn, and they're willing to help you through the process. And so it really helped me just navigate things and really just keep thriving and succeeding through the program.
That's great. So talk about your academic preparation. You come from Tougaloo College, which in my mind is a leading HBCU that produces top graduates in STEM and the humanities. They go on for graduate degrees. And so you're getting a really unique academic preparation. And so one question comes from a student who's from your alma mater, who says, you have done a great many things on a large scale throughout the course of your career. What advantages do you think that coming from a small school has had on the successes of your career?
Very good question. And when I hear this question, I think back to like my days in med school, when you're sitting in you know, a classroom with people who have been bred this from like their parents. They've been in families that have doctors in their family. And here I am, a little Mississippi girl from, you know, a country small town who didn't have that. And yet I will say that Tougaloo exposed me sometimes to more than what they had been exposed to. So I mentioned earlier, I was able to go to China and do research. I had, you know, so that experience. So I just feel like even if you're at a small institution, if you seek out the opportunities, if you take full advantage of those opportunities, and at that level of my learning, I think it was great for me because I'm a very like one-on-one hands-on type of like, let's talk more about this person. And our classroom size was so small, like it was like 8 chemistry majors. So I had that intimate education, and I think it made like the most difference at that point in my training, and it prepared me for when I like got to Brown, when I was in a class of like 200 and it wasn't so intimate, but then I could seek out those intimate moments by like going to the office hours and like letting the professor know that, okay, this is on a grander scale than what I'm used to, and they were willing to work with me. So no matter how small the school is, I think you're able to take full advantage of it, and then making sure, like at Tougaloo, for instance, there's so many opportunities, so many mentors, so many people that have gone before us that have done great things, that, you know, just taking full advantage of that is just so important. And I try to do that on every step of the path and the journey.
And you are doing it. You know, I mentioned earlier that, you're fulfilling the promise of the Leadership Alliance, because now you're serving as a mentor and you're mentoring students who are coming through Leadership Alliance. And that is so wonderful that you're doing that. And so this next question is about mentoring. Okay. And so the question is, what are your largest lessons learned since the transition from mentee to mentor?
Oh, very good. I love it. So from mentee to mentor, I think one of the things I've had to really appreciate is that we are all different. We all approach things differently. We all think differently. And just recognizing that, you know, every student is not going to be exactly like I was, right? But that can be that opportunity for me to actually, you know, instill some skills or whatever I choose to do at that particular moment. I also like in the mentor role, this idea of teamwork. Like, I'm such a team player. I love collaborations. I love team science. And so I think when you're in, the more mentee student mode, you're all thinking about like me, like, okay, how can I get this, and this? Whereas in our approach now, we are a team. And so I try to challenge the team to figure out how can we benefit and learn from one another. And I always tell my team, just like you are learning from me, trust I am also learning from you guys. And so it's this constant exchange of intellect, of knowledge, even if it's something as simple as maneuvering a drop box or something like this high-tech thing that they know how to do now. And I'm like, okay, let's have a teaching session on this. So it's just making sure that, you have this team approach, and it's just not all about like, me and trying to get to that next step. When sometimes in the mentee role, you're grinding, trying to get there. And so it's been great to have like this team-based approach, and just being able to instill in the students like things that I would like them to learn, or just little nuggets, so to speak.
Yeah, each one reach one.
Yes.
You're doing.
Absolutely.
So you've been navigating a lot of different academic spaces. And so this next question is about that. And it's, how would you describe your overall experiences in Howard University College of Medicine and Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine? And how do you navigate those spaces?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because as you know, they're two very different institutions, right? And like I was saying early, prestigious in their own way, and they're very like renowned institutions. And so I play an active role in making sure that each institution or each team that I'm working with at the institutions appreciate that about one another. So there are things that Hopkins has, resources, all these fancy equipments and all that we might not have at Howard, but that's a time for us to collaborate. That's a time for us to work together to move the field forward. Or say at Howard, we might have like an African-American population or a diverse population, other minorities that we need in, say, a particular study. Well, then here again, that's a way we can collaborate to use those fancy equipment. So it's basically just making sure that for each of the institutions, you're making sure that they realize what jewel they are for the team. And so it's always a moment of teaching. Like I was saying before, like I have to just make sure you educate them and say, okay, well, maybe you don't know what an HBCU is. Let me tell you about it. Let me tell you how great this thing called, an HBCU is. Or vice versa. There may be something about Hopkins that I have to tell about the team at Howard. But it works very beautifully together. Thankfully, I have the support of my former chair at Hopkins, Dr. Kang, who supports us still. And I have Dr. Koei, who is now my chair at Howard. And so it's a beautiful, like, collaborative effort of us just trying to move the field of dermatology forward, especially in that realm of skin of color research.
Yeah, that's so important, particularly now that we're in the era of COVID-19.
Right.
And so this next question is, we talked about how you navigate in these spaces. Now it's more about how has this pandemic affected your research and the pace at which you move forward with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to add another one because this is really similar. So as a, what other silver linings, if any, do you think COVID-19 has brought to us or to you personally? So how has the pandemic affected your research and the pace of this? And, share some silver linings. I know you always got wonderful silver linings because you're so positive, such positive energy.
I try. You have to be that way, right?
You have to.
That way. It's life. Let's call this thing called life. So let's, the first question about how has it just affected the research. Thankfully, now, and this is where life will teach you just to appreciate things. I was in a time when I was in heavy grant writing. We were recruiting. We've just gotten to Howard maybe about a little over a year, maybe going on 2 now. So we were still building. So thankfully, we didn't have active work going on, right? Because that's a whole different story when you have like sales, you have to try to figure out what you're going to do with them and so on and so forth. So I was in this grant writing mode, and in a mode where it allowed for easy transition to just change locations and continue to work. So from that aspect, thankfully, it did not affect too much. However, I do have colleagues that I've had to try to maneuver that space. And so like at Howard, what we would do, we had like a spreadsheet of like all the PIs, and like we would take turns, like if someone needs to go in and like check the freezers, you know, they would like look out to be your brother's keeper, so to speak. And so there are ways that they are navigating it, and the people who were actively doing the research. And for me, I've just been able to now go into this virtual space, right? So I took it as an opportunity to really be able to mentor even more so students, because now I'm a full believer I can mentor you from across the world. If you just are, you're willing to learn something and give something and contribute to this team, come on board. So of course, with this virtual reality, I mean, it's amazing because I can have like this meeting where students are from all over. So we've been able to do that. And one of the Leadership Alliance students, Faith, I always talk about Faith because she's always just in it to like, let's do this. And so we have our virtual meetings and we're working on papers virtually. We were able to write 2 smaller ones virtually with the students that are at Howard and something that is from afar. So you really just have to take that opportunity and say, okay, this is what life has dealt. You know, it is what it is. You regroup, you accept it for what it is, and then you just push forward. And so because, like I said, the example that I used earlier with like, we saw that COVID was happening in the obese population, comorbidities, African Americans. Well, in our minds, we were like, oh my God, this is like sounding like HS. And so we took that as an opportunity to write a smaller report about HS. And this is with the Howard students who I was supposed to have them physically in the lab. But I was like, that's okay, you're not physically in the lab, we can still make it work. So we did that one. And then the other one was about just basically thinking about teledermatology or telemedicine. What does that mean for sensitive skin areas? So like HS happens under your breasts, under your underarms, and your growing areas. How are you able to show those lesions, over a virtual network, and then things that we need to keep in mind? So that was another idea that the students and I wrote. So just being able just to take the time and say, maybe we're not, physically in the same space, physically in the lab, but we were able to take this opportunity to write some smaller reports that hopefully will move the field forward, to inform the field, and then just to work virtually with students from all over, which is awesome. It's awesome.
That's great. I think you're going to get a lot of emails of students.
Oh, we'll find a place for you.
After this comment. And just, to everyone, as a pitch, we're actually having a professional development webinar tomorrow at 4 p.m. on navigating research in the era of COVID-19. And so it was planned a few weeks ago, but we, in solidarity with the hashtag #ShutdownSTEM, we decided to reschedule that. And so if you're interested in learning more about navigating research in the era of COVID-19, join us tomorrow at 4 p.m. So I'll do that little pitch. And then we'll go back to questions, because this is fascinating. I love this question. I'm going to read this question. We're switching it a bit, moving away from COVID-19 now, and really thinking about the field. Okay, so the student says, I've read that there is a lack of racial diversity in medical textbooks, because there's very little to none imagery of dark skin tone, excuse me. As an African American in the dermatology field, is this being addressed to prevent inequity in care for those with dark skin tone? And how can we contribute, as some of us want to be involved in the medical field?
Very good question. And I think the time is now to even ask that question, right? My boss, Dr. Janetta Coy, has been an advocate in the field for quite a while. And so she writes about the lack of diversity in dermatology from a number of different angles, from like, the doctors that are in the field, the dermatologists, from those who they are actually influencing to come in, from the representation of what do we even learn about skin of color. So thankfully, this is on the minds of people in dermatology, thinking about like every disease is not manifest the same in lighter skin tone versus darker skin tone. You have societies such as the Skin of Color Society, where they actually address that, and they have a symposium every year where they talk about research that's going on in the field. And my student, Andrea, told me just the other day, we were talking about a New England Journal of Medicine small report I think a second year from, I think she was at Harvard, she wrote about literally like how medicine is missing the bullseye. And basically she talks about like this bullseye lesion that we look at for Lyme disease. You can miss it in the darker skin tone because you don't see those definitive red rings because it looks different in skin of color. And she also addressed things like, you know, the mannequins that she sees is more like, it was more Caucasian. They didn't have breasts, you know, like some patients have when you're trying to give CPR. And so she just challenged the field to like think about it in terms of when you're training your physicians to be in the generation that's right here that we're talking to, you have to think about that it's just not a one size fits all. And so Dr. Okoye and I try to really play a crucial role in making sure that if we're at the table, we're always challenging and thinking about, well, what about, you know, our skin of color patients? How are we thinking about them? And so we're doing a lot of writing in that space now, actually. So it's something that we keep on our minds, and we know that it's important to always advocate for it, always.
Yeah. That's so important because it's such a great example of how you can be an activist scholar.
Yes.
And how you can use your research and think beyond the science and make sure that what you're doing is consistent, accessible, makes sense to the communities that you're working with. So that's such important work. Yeah, so thank you for sharing those examples.
Sure.
So, you know, when I, you know, my degrees in microbiology, and I wanted to become a doctor, an MD, and I realized I hated being in hospitals. So maybe I should do research. And I love being in labs, and so that's why I went on to do research. But there's some, you know, there's one question that I love, and that's why this question reminded me of that. And so it's from a student. It says, how did you talk to your family about your goals and aspirations? I wanted to talk to my family about getting a PhD and doing research, but have a hard time getting across to them. I'm the first in my family to go to college, so most of what I say goes over their head. So we've seen this a lot. So what are your reflections on this? This is a great question.
Wow, that's a great question. And I tell you, until this day, I still don't think they get it. I still think they're like, what is Angel doing? Like, ask my mom, and I'm like, Mom, I'm just going to write you a little card to put in, just pull it out, and you just say, just hand this to them. Don't even try to explain it anymore. So I get it. Until this day, I still think my family is trying to figure it out. And so that's why I say it's so important to have those mentors. It's so important to have like the Leadership Alliance, where you can navigate those spaces and talk to people who've actually done it. And then you're able to just tell your family like the bigger picture, you know, right? Like you could say, well, I'm really interested in looking at a disease and understanding the why behind the disease. So, you know, and that's kind of how you have to just keep it simple, just like that. If I try to explain to them about hidradenitis suppurativa and the neutrophils and I get all excited, they're like, oh God, here she goes. So I think we have to just keep it simple and just keep it in a way to where they will like still be excited about it and understand it from the broader aspect. And just saying that you're really passionate about like seeing a disease and understanding how that disease works. That's how I try to explain to them about, you know, this MD, PhD, and how I utilize both trainings. But I think it's something, like I said, that you'll forever have to deal with. But just take it as an opportunity to just teach them, but teach them in a different way. And I'm still trying to find different ways. I think the card with my mom was the latest, and I'm just like, all right, I just pull this out and just say, just like a business card, just pull it out. And it's a little blurb on there. So.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. When I was in grad school, they were just like, yeah, she's a professional student. That's how they would describe it. Yeah, she's still in school.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's funny.
That's awesome. Cool. So, you know, and to be in school for that long requires a lot of resilience. And so how have you been able to maintain that resilience throughout your career? And what advice would you give to your younger self?
So I think that in terms of just resilience, and I hope I'm not going to offend anyone, but I'm very spiritual, and God is like the leader of my life. And so a lot of what I do and what I try to understand is literally just seeking Him and His will. making sure that I always do my part, but then leaving it up to him and know that I have to just submit to the will of God. So there have been many moments, many hard times, many discouraging times, many times that, you know, a lot of people were like, girl, I just don't even see how you saw it through. But by the grace of God, you know, like I made it. So I try to always just keep that positive, you know, outlook. I try to always look at whatever the situation is, there's something that you can gain positive from it. I don't care what, it's something that you can say, well, this happened, but. And so I try to let that, you know, but always come to be something positive, you know, instead of saying all the positive and then come in with something negative. I get all that negative stuff. I'm like, but, you know, we still have this to look forward to, and this is going. So just always keeping that positive, that standpoint, no matter what, and challenging yourself to always look for that, you know, that positivity in everything, no matter what.
Yeah, that's so important. And finding whatever it is that you can hold on to and grasp, and that just
Absolutely.
keeps you grounded.
Keep you grounded. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being very candid about that, because it's real.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but you've had such a wonderful experience, you know, a wonderful trajectory of being able to go to China, you mentioned. So how has having that experience changed your career?
That's a good one. For that one, I think because it was so out of the box and I hadn't even thought about what it would be like, you know. I remember that when I was trying to figure out what I would do the summer after my freshman year, I just wasn't ready. Like, that's one of the reasons why I went to Tulu. I was like, I'm not leaving home. Like, I want to be right here with mama and my family, you know? So I wasn't really ready to spread my wings, so to speak. But I felt that when it was that after the first summer and then the second one, I was like, you know, I think I'm ready. I'm ready to do this thing. I don't know if I was ready to like go all the way to China, but I was like, hey, let's give it a try. And again, those mentors who saw that passion in me and was like, I think you will be fine. I think you can do this. And so having the opportunity and just being open to taking the opportunity, because I know a lot of my classmates, they were not feeling it. They were like, girl, I'm not going to China. Like, are you going to stay on that plane so long? And and I was like, it's okay. We're going to take on this like challenge and this opportunity. So just willing to like leap, honestly. And then when I actually got there to just see that this is like a whole world out there that's beyond Mississippi, you know, because we get so comfortable in our own zones and what we know. It was just intriguing to see that this is a whole new way of life, a whole new world. And again, it allowed me the opportunity to teach them something about me and my small town, you know, or, you know, the Southern way of living. So it was another opportunity where I could also like tell them about the greatness of Mississippi in the US. And then just being able to appreciate certain things that I think I probably took for granted being an American, the things that were readily available. And one of the things I'll never forget in China, when you use the restroom, it's not like a stall that's there. It's literally like a hole in the ground. So like, you're just like, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? So just, you know, just taking full advantage of the opportunity, learning from it, from both like the cultural aspects, and then from in the lab, so the guy that I was working with, his American name that I gave him was Stephen. And he basically had to really work to explain things to me because of the accent and the barrier of that. But he did an amazing job. And because of the way that I learn and process, and because he had to take it really slow, it was amazing. Because we were really able to like really hone down on different techniques, and he would want to go over them again because it allowed him to practice his English. And I'm like, yeah, let's go over it again so I can make sure that I have it. So it was just great. It was great just being in that environment. Until this day, I still keep in touch with the PI over there. And hopefully, I told her one day I'm going to get back over there. One day.
Yeah, that's awesome. That was actually my next question, if you are still in touch with Stephen.
Mm-hmm.
And also this is related to a student's question of, you know, how did you strengthen and how do you keep these relationships with your mentors through at China, but also through the Leadership Alliance throughout the years?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a great question. I think it's something that we can all improve on, right? Because life gets busy and then you're like, oh my, I haven't, you know, wrote to so-and-so or this mentor. But what I try to do is whenever I have a milestone or something that I've accomplished, I try to use that as it's time to check in, because you think about it, every milestone, everything that you accomplish, they played a role in that for, helping you and believing in you and molding you to get to that point. So I try to use that as an opportunity to say, okay, it's time to check in, right? It's time to give updates. And even then, sometimes life gets so crazy, I don't do it exactly when I should, but definitely it's a time to do it. And also just making sure that if I see something in a space, like in terms of the research or a topic that I know that one of my other mentors is a leader in that field as well, I'm like, ooh, this is a way to collaborate. And so you reach out to them then, and then you have the common interest of trying to bring whatever that story is to fruition. So I think you have to play an active role in doing it, because the way life is set up, if you don't, it will not get done, and you will continue to be in your own zone, just grinding and working. So just setting aside those moments when you're like, hey, just checking in, wanted to give you an update of the, the last things I was able to accomplish. And now that I'm publishing more, that's usually around the publications when I try to reach out and say, hey, just wanted to share with you a recent story or something. But even in, a milestone of finishing the year or graduating or something like that, it's always a good time to check in, because their success is your success and your success is their success. So it goes.
That's right. And we totally post your publications, particularly the ones that get the cover of a major scientific journal. Totally post that on Leadership Alliance Connect and on the website. So yes.
Thank you for all the support.
It definitely helped to amplify those successes also, as we all should do.
Absolutely.
So now, but just thinking, because you've had such an illustrious career so far, and like I said, I know there are going to be greater things in the future. But was there ever a specific time or event that made you know exactly where you were headed with your career and what your focus in dermatology would be on?
Right. So I think I have to step back and think about how I even ended up in dermatology. Never in a million years would I even thought about I would be in dermatology. We don't really get exposed to it that much in medical school. So it's one of those things that my boss, Dr. Okoye, is really trying to advocate that we need to have more exposure. You need to know about this field called dermatology. And it's one of those fields, it's usually for someone like me, it's oh, never in a million years. We'll never have the opportunity to do that. So when I graduated from Brown, and I found myself yearning to find a disease where people always say, how can I utilize this MD and this PhD? How can I really find a disease, find a space where I feel like I can contribute to it? And so that's where, again, I had great mentors. Every time I would explain to them what I was looking for, how I wanted to really have a career doing that translational approach, they were like, have you ever considered derm? And I'm like, oh, no, absolutely not. How could I ever consider derm? No. So one of my mentors actually knew about this ethnic skin fellowship at Hopkins, and she was like, you should definitely think about this. And I was like, me? She was like, yeah. She's like, but I want you to think about it from the lens of how you really want to mold it. So in the traditional sense, I was the third fellow. It was more of a clinical fellowship, but I wanted to bring that translational approach. I did want that clinical component, but I really wanted that opportunity to take what I was seeing in the clinic and then back to the actual lab to see how I can understand it. And so because I had learned the normal response of neutrophils and the innate immunity, and I did some reading on the disease and what little was known and what Dr. Okoye had accomplished, I was like, I wonder, what is happening abnormally that's leading to the disease that we're seeing clinically. So I posed the question to her, and I told her all these great ideas I had. And of course, she was like, I love this. We totally need to do it. And so we set it up to where the fellowship was more like a postdoc, actually, because I was in the clinic just to assess, get the samples, and build the biobank of having that patient biospecimen. And that was the material that you use in the lab to try to understand the why behind it. So I think you just have to always seek opportunities, always think in a very unique space, and think about how can you utilize the trainings and opportunities that you have to make the most of it. Seek your mentors, talk through it, and eventually it pans out, like, and your destiny is fulfilled. And I still think I'm in search of my destiny right now, day by day, honestly, day by day.
Yeah, no, the journey continues.
Yeah.
And I think, and I think, you know, you're giving great advice, particularly for undergraduates who are sort of really thinking about what are the skills that they need to learn and refine in preparation for graduate school. And this is one of the questions that came from the students.
Mm-hmm. So in grad school, I think it was more about that critical thinking, literally. And I think one of the things I had to learn earlier on, because I thought it was all about, you know, I had to be in this particular field or this area. Well, life taught me that real quick. I was in the lab for 2 years and I had to start all over, and I was devastated. I'm like, but this is, you know, endocrinology is what I wanted to do. This is where I thought I was going to make the most impact. But I realized that it was all about finding that mentor who was going to be there for me and learn with me, help me learn, and really get to the end of this actual degree. So I think just keeping that in mind, you know, as you're trying to like pursue this very challenging thing called a PhD, you have to have that space where you're able to learn. You have someone who's backing you up and able to learn with you and teach you things. Not taking it as like it was a bad thing and losing 2 years, I tried to take that to the next level and say, okay, how can I use what I learned in those 2 years to take it to a total new area? So that's when I went into neutrophil biology. So keeping that open space of just saying that I'm here to learn, and whatever you're willing to teach me, I'm going to take it in and apply it. And then I would say when I actually got in Dr. Reichner's lab, I feel that it was all about just always willing to work your butt off. Like no matter how many projects failed, no matter how many times it didn't go the way you thought it was going to be, the data is telling you something. Listen to the data, interpret the data as it is, and use it to form your next question. So it's that constant critical thinking of what is being presented to you day in and day out. Some days are going to be better than others. Some days in the lab, you're going to find things you're like, oh my God, Nobel Prize, here we come. But you know, some days it's not always like that. So no matter how high or how low it is, you just have to keep trucking. And then just being able to form that into a story and remembering that you are here to move the field forward. How is what you're studying moving the field forward? And that's one thing that I think I always try to keep in the forefront. Whatever experiment I'm designing, whatever the next project is, how is it going to help those patients that are back in the clinic that I see suffering from HS or suffering from a derm disease? And so you always have to think through that as well. So just keeping that critical thinker on, being willing to always learn more and figuring out how you can apply what you learn to whatever you're studying, and then packaging that up into a story or a write-up that you can, you know, offer to the scientific community and move the field forward. And so that's something that I learned, especially towards the ending of my PhD. And Dr. Reichner always told me that it'll get a little easier, you know, to publish and to do those things if you just keep that critical thinker going and keep that hat on where you're always asking the why behind things. And so that's just how I approach it day to day.
Yeah, I hear the perseverance.
Yes.
Being flexible about your research and just being open to learning all things.
All things.
Because, yeah, that is wonderful. Yeah, I'm going to write that down as it for me too. I'm going to keep that in mind. This is being recorded. I'm going to have to watch this again. Next time I write a grant that doesn't get funded. Dr. Byrd said, you have to persevere. Despite all odds. You have to keep going.
You have to. You have to.
Ruth, Speak truth to power. Okay. We've gotten through a lot of questions, and I really appreciate, your answering as many questions as we can in the hour. I think we have time for just one more question, and I think maybe, yeah, just one more question, because I think this is a really important question, and just I want to give you time to really reflect on it, and then end with some closing thoughts. And the question also from a student is, do you think it is important to have a clear path in mind when pursuing higher education? Or is it okay to not be completely sure?
That's a good one. That is really a good one. And I will say that I am a living witness. I am a living example of no matter how you think you have got it all figured out, you kind of have to just continue to just do your part, continue to just learn, continue to just keep pushing forward, because things will change. Like I said, I started in an endocrinology lab and I thought that, that was it. That's how I'm going to be in the world of endocrinology and diabetes, but that really wasn't. And so I had to adapt to this new learning of innate immunity and neutrophils. And look, now it landed me a job at like Hopkins and Howard. So it worked out okay. But if I hadn't been open to that change and open to saying, well, you know what? Maybe that's not what I'm going to be able to, contribute. There's other ways I can collaborate with an endocrinologist and bring forth, whatever it is that I wanted to do. So definitely you won't have it all figured out, and life will quickly show you if you think that you got it all figured out. But I just think you have to keep that big picture in mind. And I think for me, it was more so just knowing that, like I said, in the medicine, I loved trying to see, okay, what is missing here? Something is not right. Why don't we know why this disease is happening? And then knowing that from the PhD standpoint, I wanted to go beyond just giving a medication. I want to know why. I want to take those cells back to the lab and see, can I figure out a personalized approach to help this patient instead of giving them a blanket approach and saying, here, just take this antibiotic, it should work. So I think you have to just always be in pursuit of your destiny. I did want to read from T.D. Jakes' book, Destiny. I highly recommend it. It's something I go back to often. It says that destiny will sometimes be elusive and guide you on a circuitous path as you follow her in search of why. But led by instinct as you pursue purpose, you will discover the why of your life. And then you will know that the fulfillment of destiny is the greatest kind of success you can ever hope to gain. And so I'm always in pursuit of my destiny. I'm still in pursuit of it. And so I encourage you to always be in pursuit of your destiny.
Oh, such powerful words to end with. Oh my goodness, this has been such a wonderful conversation. And I just want you to know that we will always be a part of your pursuit of your destiny. And we know that you're going to be contributing to the destinies of so many talented scholars. And for that, we thank you for all that you have done and all that you're doing. Thank you, Dr. Byrd, for this conversation. And we will send you some questions that were not answered. I know there were a little bit more scientific questions.
Okay.
And so if you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes to respond to those questions, I think our participants will be very happy.
I will. I look forward to it.
All right. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.